This episode of Sports Medicine Weekly is brought to you in part by Karen Malkin's new protein brownie bar and superfood bars. Best tasting bars on the market, certified gluten-free, paleo, and no added sugar. Karen's protein brownie bars and superfood bars available on Amazon and at KarenMalkin.com. Also, JRF Ortho. They partner with orthopedic surgeons to improve the quality of life of patients by enabling them to have an active life through the generous gift of cartilage and ligament transplantation. Please go to jrfortho.org to learn more. Sign up to be a tissue donor at donatelife.net. Welcome, everyone, to Sports Medicine Weekly. I'm Steve Cashel, along with Dr. Brian Cole, head team physician with the Chicago Bulls, one of the team surgeons, and also orthopedic specialist surgeon from Midwest Orthopedics at Rush. And Dr. Cole, how are you?
Steve, I'm doing great. And, one of the things I wanted to point out, our sponsors are incredibly important to us. And I think our listeners of our episodes within our Sports Medicine Weekly podcast need to know that all of the net proceeds go to support orthopedic research at Rush University Medical Center. And as you know, our colleagues are actively involved in searching for the most up-to-date solutions that are reliable to help our patients stay on their feet, get rid of pain, and keep them active and functional. So it's a really important endeavor, and it's really the mission behind our podcast. But we also obviously want to dispense great information that our listeners will find interesting.
Well, I think we've got a great topic here, Dr. Cole, vaccines of athletes. And we want to have you walk us through the situation in the NBA, being an NBA team doctor for a long time. You work with the NBA, I know, and of course, specifically with the Chicago Bulls. Bulls All-Star guard and leading scorer Zach LaVine entering into the NBA's health and safety protocol recently. Take us through testing and what this means. And where we're at compared to where we were 5 months ago.
It's a fascinating area, Steve. I remember back when I never thought I'd become an expert in this area. I can tell you that much because, I think back to the days when we first started taking care of the Bulls and we had a heart issue in one of our players, Eddie Curry, and I had to learn about arrhythmias and what we call hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a condition I barely ever heard of other than in medical school. And all of a sudden,
I remember, by the way, because I got to know you, I'm like, this is an orthopedic surgeon, and you're on a board there with, I think, Dr. Kathy Weber, and talking about as if you were a cardiologist. I'm like, boy, this is really interesting how an orthopedic surgeon, I want to get into that maybe in a future podcast, but and that was like your first year, second year, right? Yeah, it was crazy. I was like, if this is what it's going to be like, I got to continue to be a student.
And, what's interesting, when you're a medical student, you can pretty much, once you get into the groove, you can pretty much learn anything. And so that was a topic that we were able to, delve into, and there's plenty of information. And I also have experts around me to ask plenty of questions. So while I wasn't a primary decision maker, I knew an awful lot about it, even up to and through genetic testing and everything else. And, the analogy is with coronavirus. Back in March and April, I didn't know much about the infectious disease side of it, what a pandemic was, how do we protect ourselves, what are the mitigating efforts. A year ago you're talking about, right? What's that? A year ago you're talking about. Yeah, it was just basically a little longer than a year ago today, if you just think about where we were. And very quickly, because we stopped working, I stopped seeing patients for about 5 weeks, except for emergency. So we didn't do any surgery, and we had no formal clinics, and we were just basically triaging more emergent situations to keep people out of the emergency room. And a lot of that time was just spent reading. I mean, I was just, doing deep dives into articles from the CDC, from the NIH, from publications, it was all happening real time. It was amazing how the information was coming out so quickly and in such a dense fashion. And then also how much misinformation was, because people wanted the information quickly, but there often wasn't time to sort of do the same analysis that we typically would, just because of the gravity of the situation. So you could see how in 1 month we'd be talking about one thing, and a month later it would be maybe a different framework. So that part was really fascinating, but also intellectually stimulating. Yeah. So, look, I think obviously COVID is still with us. In fact, At the time of us doing this episode, the numbers are still rising in various places, especially when mitigation efforts such as social distancing and masking are unfortunately have remained some of it a political issue. So you look at Michigan, and Michigan is as bad now in terms of the number of cases and number of hospitalizations as it was in September. At the same time, we're faced with a variant or several variants from various places, including South Africa, that are more easily transmittable. They may be more deadly, and they are. There is always concern that the current vaccinations that we have available to us might not actually cover us for all these variants. So it's not over, but the flip side is you got a 20+% of the population is being vaccinated, and millions of people being vaccinated each day. And I think the landscape is changing. We were going to reach herd immunity vis-a-vis enough people getting the disease or vaccine. And the combination of the two is really what's going to sort of get us there. What's going on now is that the vaccines are becoming increasingly available to more people as different states go into different phases. Most recently in Illinois, they approved to go for 16 years of age and older. So our younger people now can get vaccinated. So we're still going to fight that supply-demand curve, but at least more and more people are eligible. And then obviously with the recent challenges with J&J, that adds a whole new dimension because that was briefly put on hold while they try to analyze these adverse events, which, mind you, Steve, are very, very rare, right? I'm sure you've heard a bit about that. And the incidence that at least initially reported was 1 in a million for this one adverse event, which was platelets that would drop, and then people would have a blood clotting situation, which was very serious. But arguably, epidemiologists would say that that type of thing can happen even independent of the vaccine, and that's what a lot of those things were reported as, saying, "Look, we see these problems anyway. Is the vaccine really making a difference?"
Well, and take us through, Dr. Cole, if you will. All right, this specific situation with an NBA player, I brought up Zach LaVine. How does one enter into the NBA's health and safety protocol? I as a fan, a former broadcaster would say, well, Zach is, you guys are doing testing. I'm not there every day, of course, but take us through. So the NBA players are still being tested daily or weekly or a couple times a week. And then how does one enter the protocol? It's obviously from a positive test, correct?
Yeah, well, not necessarily always positive test, Steve. It can be being traced out. Okay. So the basic paradigm is that just because we and other organizations test regularly to determine positivity and potentially being infectious, that doesn't mean you still can't get the virus. And so that's the first tenet. So what's stunning is that our players are just, and the players in the NBA have been incredibly mindful. And the policies, despite now many of them getting vaccinated, we're trying, there's a tremendous effort for advocacy to vaccinate the entire NBA, the entire Major League Baseball, and it's happening. Obviously, there are some individuals, and we'd love to talk about, who still are resistant and have concerns about getting the vaccine. But fortunately, the percentages of people agreeing and willing to take the vaccine is very, very high, and we're grateful for that. But despite that, things can still happen. And the testing, what hasn't been completely worked out is how will testing change once everyone is fully vaccinated. At this point, testing is a regular thing. And we've learned, and we'll have some publications that will come out of the NBA experience that have taught us some very interesting principles. When one tests on a regular basis, you can actually there's a sensitivity to not only can we catch people just turning positive, we can get a sense of infectiousness based upon how they turn the test positive. The so-called CT threshold or CT count. It's a laboratory based assessment that sort of indicates how difficult it is to maybe culture or assess the virus. And the more difficult it is, despite turning a positive test, the less infectious you are. The flip side, if someone were very symptomatic and then turns a test positive, that person is thought to be much more infectious because they have more viral copies, and the testing that they do can more easily demonstrate the presence of the virus. And in that situation, then we believe that person is more infectious. So when someone's completely asymptomatic yet turns a positive test, there's actually a way that because of the thousands of tests that have been done, we've learned to actually determine when someone could turn a test, but maybe is not infectious. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but you said, we're testing all the time. Give me more specific. I mean, are these players tested daily? Is it weekly, a couple days a week?
No, it's daily.
Is there an NBA rule?
It's daily and sometimes twice a day, even after a game.
Okay.
So the density of testing is very, very high, and I'm still testing pretty much daily, despite being fully vaccinated and having an immune response to the vaccine.
All right, so tell us what you know then, Dr. Cole, how a vaccine works. Let's say the player, because you can't get vaccinated, one day and one another day. I got vaccinated 3 weeks ago. My next one is basically in a week or two, right? You have to wait. So how does that work? And it takes a little while for it to kick in, so to speak, right?
Right. So it does. And the vaccines are really fascinating. The vaccine was the DNA, the genetic pattern of COVID was actually occurred in January of 2020. And because of essentially a worldwide collaboration between our governments and companies and billions of dollars spent, they were able to actually synthesize the genetic code, what we call messenger RNA, very quickly. And it doesn't involve the virus, it doesn't involve eggs, it doesn't involve cells, but they were able to reproduce the messenger RNA. And messenger RNA basically gives instructions to our cells to make what is really a harmless piece of the virus called the spike protein. So the spike protein is a protein that's found on the surface of the virus. Now, the virus that causes COVID-19 will have a spike protein, and when your body sees this spike protein, if you get infected, the immune system responds by producing an immune response that can be either antibodies or memory cells, what we call B cells and T cells, become activated. So that's how basically most vaccines work. They mimic in a non-pathologic way what the virus would otherwise do if you got the virus, but you don't get sick from it because it's not an active virus. It's a piece of something that the body recognizes. So what happens is that the messenger RNA basically provides instructions for our immune system to make the piece of protein, and then after the piece is made, the cells that made it that were induced to make them from the vaccine, the cells break down and the instructions go away. So the instruction is sort of a one-time thing. They instruct our cells to make the spike protein. That protein is seen by our immune system to then remember an immune response. But because it's not the virus itself doing the damage, our immune system basically is poised and ready should you be faced with the virus in real time to respond appropriately at an elevated level. So it's almost like it's like activating a little army of Pac-Men who can then fight, what happens in a natural infection against COVID, but it's mimicking it so that if you do get infected, that it can fight it in a responsible way without the virus winning. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to take a break right now. We'll be right back. I want to recognize a couple of our sponsors. Vericell is one of our sponsors. They develop, manufacture, and market autologous cell-based therapies for patients with serious diseases and conditions. For more information about their products, visit VCEL.com. Also, Midwest Orthopedics at Rush, MOR, among the international leaders in musculoskeletal health. Midwest Orthopedics at Rush physicians, all faculty in the Department of Orthopedic Surgery at Rush University Medical Center, which is currently ranked number 5 in orthopedics by U.S. News and World Report. Founded in 2003, Midwest Orthopedics at Rush is comprised of internationally renowned orthopedic and spine surgeons who pioneer the latest advances in technology and surgical techniques to improve the lives and activity levels of patients around the world. The physicians of Midwest Orthopedics at Rush, proud to be the official team physicians for the Chicago Bulls, Chicago White Sox, and Chicago Fire Soccer Club, along with the Joffrey Ballet. Visit rushortho.com to learn more and schedule an appointment at one of the Midwest Orthopedics at Rush's convenient Chicago and West Suburban locations. Back to our topic, Steve Cashel, Dr. Brian Cole. You're listening to Sports Medicine Weekly. So an NBA player goes into the protocol, Dr. Cole. We're thinking with a positive test, or as you said, maybe the contact tracing. Is there a rule, an NBA rule of how long they have to sit out? Because we hear these NBA players are now into the health NBA's health and safety protocol. What does that mean, and why can't they put a specific time on it?
Well, the longest time, absent of any significant complication or medical issues pertaining to the virus, is basically 14 days. And the reason is that so this, when an individual is in the protocol, they're basically in isolation. So that has its own implications. And this is all recommendations by the CDC. The NBA, the MLB, all of us basically follow what's publicly available by the CDC. And so at a minimum, it's 10 days. But the challenge with athletes is that because they're going back into a high exertion sport, and we remain concerned about other complications related to potentially being infected, there is a cardiac assessment. It's almost like a return to play program after having a concussion. So any athlete who is in the protocol for whatever reason, again, Steve, remember, sometimes people are just traced out and they're not necessarily positive. So we're not providing any information one way or another about what's in the media. I'm just telling you that there's a lot of reasons that people go into a protocol, and it doesn't mean they're sick either. So a minimum of 10 days, and then they are deemed, presumably in the absence of symptoms, for 24 to 48 hours to be not infectious, even if they did turn a positive test, okay, if that was part of the situation.
Yep.
But then returning them back, there's a cardiac evaluation, a heart evaluation, because there have been reports of associated heart issues that can be triggered by high levels of exertion.
Wow,
So
remember that.
That's where
absolutely.
It's like returning a player after concussion. It's
Right.
Exposure to exercise. It's some baseline testing, and then exposure to exercise to make sure they can tolerate that return, and then they can return, and that can take upwards of 14 days. And then unfortunately, because when they're in the protocol, sometimes they can't exercise, work out, train. They don't have access to the same resources. You've got to deal with the impairment that's associated with just being on losing out on strength and conditioning. So it's complicated. And I said from the beginning of the year that we all recognize that even absent of the injuries that we see, games will be won and lost based upon COVID. And our team has been, I think, exemplary in terms of doing everything possible for mitigation. And that's the thing that I was saying before that is so stunning, is that despite all of the efforts, and I'm not talking about the testing, I'm just talking about the efforts to avoid being infected by someone else, which are extraordinary, and these guys are insanely disciplined, it still happens. And I think that's what the public needs to know, that this has not gone away. This is a system where people have all kinds of resources and they're responsible and they're motivated, yet it can still happen. And I think that that's what people have to recognize, that this is still here. So think about, as people let down their guard because they think they're tired of it. They're tired of this COVID thing. That doesn't mean that it's gone away. And truth be told, as I mentioned, in certain states, especially Michigan, our neighbor, they're struggling again. And the ICUs are seeing patients again. And people are dying again, and it's still a going concern that we can't just assume that because the vaccine is here, we're still dealing with being far from herd immunity, if you will. And think about it, the cost of the healthcare system. I want to talk a little bit about the vaccine, but why the vaccine is so important, because just think about it. 5 years from now, if someone says, "Well, look, everyone else around me got the vaccine, I didn't, and now I've got the disease," and they're in the hospital system. Just think about the enormous impact on the healthcare system of people who choose not to get the vaccine, let alone their exposure, that the risk that they're putting themselves in.
Let me stop you there. Are there NBA players, you touched on this at the beginning of our show here, this episode, that are they asking the NBA players if they want to get vaccinated? They don't have to if they choose not to, correct?
There's no mandate, to my knowledge, in any sport that says you have to do it, but I could be wrong for some. I will say that this becomes I would say medical, legal, even ethical dilemma. I can tell you that, for example, I cannot show up for work unless I have a TB test and have my TB, tuberculosis. The little skin test you used to get to put the wheel under your skin to see if it turns red. So I cannot work with patients in healthcare unless I show a negative TB test on a regular time, over regular periods of time, and have my immunizations, DPT test, diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus. I have to make sure that and polio, I have to make sure that I'm vaccinated. I cannot go to work and see patients if I'm not.
Okay.
And so there are going to be situations in the workplace, and I'm not saying this is happening now to my knowledge in sports, but where people cannot come to work unless they're vaccinated.
Let me add this. NFL recently issued a memo to franchises stating it will limit the access of some team personnel who don't submit to a vaccination. So what they're saying, as it stands right now, mandatory player vaccinations would fall under collective bargaining, with players having their working conditions negotiated by their unions. So, but they've told some key personnel, the key personnel at NFL teams, you better be vaccinated, otherwise you're not going to be around the team. So it's the first league, it's the NFL again, that is actually issued the memo and mandating that their Tier 1 and Tier 2 personnel get vaccinated. So maybe more to follow with the NBA, MLB, and the rest of the professional leagues.
Yeah, so I think, what they're saying is it's not that you can't come to work, but rightly so, because you could be more at risk of infecting others and or getting the virus yourself. We want to responsibly limit you so that just like you were when no one was vaccinated, there's no reason that they should be able to sidestep the protocols. The vaccine does allow us to change some of our behaviors, and while we're still looking into the ability to be secondarily infected after a vaccine, that might happen, we are still remaining concerned about the new variant slipping through the vaccine. That might happen. And also potentially being a carrier to infect other non-vaccinated people is also a concern. So we're still working through the details, but there's no question that the bar is very much raised after you're vaccinated in terms of how you might or could behave in the public sector with reconsideration for mitigating efforts such as social distancing and wearing a mask. In point of fact, the CDC now, Steve, has position statements on what do you do if you have a room of 10 people who are all vaccinated and how can they behave and so forth. So those are fact patterns that you and I have to sort of be mindful of. And I think at some point we'll do another episode for our podcast on this so that we can educate the public on what, the CDC says in terms of what we can and cannot do. I wonder if we could just spend a couple of minutes before we finish up this episode on the vaccine itself and maybe some of the myths that are out there related to the vaccine.
Please, that'd be great.
So, Steve, there were two vaccine trials that were well publicized. One was the Pfizer trial, which had about 43,500 volunteers, and the other one was the Moderna trial, which was 30,000 volunteers. And those vaccines are pretty similar. They have cold storage and require two vaccines spread out over a couple of weeks. And what people need to know is that there was there was sufficient representation of minorities, which was one of the concerns in those trials in terms of representation by Black individuals. It was approximately 10% in each of those trials. In terms of representing people in high-risk conditions, about 45% of them in the Pfizer trial had high-risk positions, but only about 22% of them had them in the Moderna trial. So it wasn't always looking at high-risk people, but when it looked at individuals of color in general, more than a third of the volunteers in the Moderna trial were people of communities of color, and Hispanic and Latino communities were represented by about 13% of the Pfizer trial. So the take home is that it had a very fair distribution of what we see in the United States that was believed to be representative in the trial, because one of the concerns is that a certain population wasn't fairly represented. So how can we draw conclusions? Both the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine have been about 94% or better efficacy against the infection. In fact, with the Pfizer vaccine, it was 90% effective against severe COVID infections. In the Moderna vaccine, it was 100% effective against severe infections. So even if you unfortunately became infected, it was very effective in preventing severe disease. People do worry about the side effects of the vaccines. And, truth be told, the most common symptoms are brief site pain and redness at the site of the injection. In fewer than 10%, people will complain of fatigue and muscle pain. And less than 5% they'll complain of joint pain or headache, and rarely a fever. There's a little higher chance to get these symptoms with a second dose. What we learned is that simply taking Tylenol can mitigate those symptoms. We don't know if this vaccine will protect us for life. We're not ready to say give up mask wearing and social distancing after we get the vaccine. I will tell you that some of the myths, and maybe we could finish up with this, is that as I described to you, it's not the virus that's being injected. So the COVID-19 vaccine cannot give someone the COVID-19 infection. The COVID vaccine will not alter our DNA. It will not cause infertility or a miscarriage. There's never been a focus of vaccinating specific communities to test the vaccine. It was widely assessed across all race, gender, age, etc. There was a myth that the vaccine has a microchip to control the population and even deport people, which is just absurd. So those are some of the things that were sort of confabulated, and I think it's important to understand that there are some cultural biases and concerns that weigh into someone's decision to take the vaccine. But when you look at some of our underrepresented minorities across the board, the incidence of hospitalizations and even death is much higher in some groups. And it's that at-risk group that really needs to strongly consider taking the vaccine as much as anyone else, because there's something readily available that can change the course of our history right now. And when you weigh the pros, cons, and the adverse events, which are very, very rare, I think that just the general balance is to take the vaccine. And people say, well, which one should I get?
That's a good question, because that's a big topic with the J&J.
Yeah. Until they sort the J&J issue, I would just take, which is on hold at the time of this episode, I would say take the one that's available to you. So that's my take on it, and I hope this is helpful for our listeners.
Great stuff, Dr. Cole. We appreciate it. Thanks to all of our sponsors, and we will look forward to doing our next podcast. And thanks, everyone, for listening to Sports Medicine Weekly, and our website is sportsmedicineweekly.com. So long, everybody.